Welcome to Chatting the Pictures. My name is Cara Finnegan, and I'm a writer, teacher, and historian of photography.
And I'm Michael Shaw. I'm a writer, a psychologist, and also the publisher of Reading the Pictures.
Our first segment we call The News, and here we're interested in how news photos tell a story.
This photograph was taken by David Ryder for Reuters. It was taken at the Life Care Center nursing home in Kirkland, Washington, now ground zero in the King County fight against the coronavirus. As of Tuesday, there were 21 confirmed cases in King County, including 9 deaths and 5 from the Life Care Center.
There's a number of things about this image that are really interesting to me. One of those is the extent to which it illustrates the nature of healthcare work as conducted frequently, maybe even often in this context, primarily by women. And I think that idea of healthcare as a gendered work, often taken up by women of color in particular, those pink scrubs to me really punctuate that. When we're talking about on the ground in contexts, especially where people are caring for older patients, a lot of the folks doing that work are women.
There's 2 themes here that really stand out. One is how much it speaks to the makeshift nature of the United States response to the outbreak. America has had months to prepare since the coronavirus took hold in China. And here we see a nursing home staff with substandard protection shielding infected patients with bed sheets. If you look at similar scenes from Asia and Europe, they show military or biohazard teams, not just nursing home workers or local EMT, handling patients, and they will be equipped with hazmat suits with goggles and actual respirator masks, not just surgical masks, handling the infected. And then the way that they're holding the sheets and blocking the patients from view also, I believe, speaks to a near cover-up of the crisis on the part of the government so far. The CDC has completely bungled the testing process in the United States. Up to a few days ago, CDC and the FDA required a review process of each result. And then the small number of kits that they actually distributed proved mostly faulty. So in contrast to, say, the response in South Korea, where in a matter of weeks, they had 500 coronavirus testing sites in place, including drive-thrus, and screened more than 100,000 people, America is barely getting its act together, even at this point.
I'm also struck with the presence of the flimsy sheets ostensibly protecting from view a patient being loaded into an ambulance. I'm struck by the extent to which this photograph highlights what we're not seeing in the imagery, which is the patients themselves. Due to their absolute right to privacy, they remain hidden, they remain quarantined. But part of that means that we're kind of left to look around the edges of the epidemic itself. And so what it means to actually be a coronavirus patient, how does that person look? How are they walking around? What are they doing every day as they're being treated for a disease that can both kill people and also be something that people can recover from in a certain amount of time? That absence contributes to not only potentially a lack of understanding, but also a kind of impulse to jump to metaphor, if you will, with images like this. Our next segment we call The Look, and here we're interested in how photos push the visual boundaries to illuminate a story or an idea.
This photograph was taken by Joseph Axe for Reuters. In it, you see churchgoers turning their backs on Michael Bloomberg at the historic Brown Chapel AME Church in Selma, Alabama, on the 55th anniversary of the city's Bloody Sunday Civil Rights March.
As many folks know, Bloody Sunday was an event that took place in 1965 where peaceful marchers, more than 600 of them, were assaulted while crossing the Edmund Pettus Bridge. People were grievously hurt, including Congressman John Lewis. That symbolism, I think, is really important for understanding this, what we might call image event, where people in the crowd chose to stand and turn their back on Michael Bloomberg, presumably in the context of protesting his history regarding stop and frisk in New York City when he was mayor.
I love how this photograph inverts the power structure, reading back to front, bottom up, parishioners first, or grassroots aspect to it. And in particular, then, what you barely see is the billionaire at the dais who is almost invisible in spite of having sunk around $500 million into the campaign before he dropped out. It does at the same time, though, raise the question of populism in the campaign. CNN reported that there was 9 people that stood up. This photograph makes it look like many more. I wonder how much that is the case in the campaign overall. You wonder how much the people who are the most activist in this campaign really are having an impact outside of very overt moments like this.
Their choice to turn their backs, stand quietly, really embodies the kind of peaceful protest that Selma was about, and the symbolism of Selma, standing up against repression and oppression, facing force with nonviolence. The second part about that I find interesting is, without profiling people who are standing too much in terms of age, this does appear to be a multi-generational group of people. We're recording this the morning after Super Tuesday, when Joe Biden beat nearly everyone, nearly everywhere.
And I think your point is really crystallized in the monitors and the contrast between the scene on the monitors versus the scene from the back of the church and these people standing up in protest. Because the scene on those monitors is a scene that you might see on the media or something that's much more typical. But it speaks to those two different views and the danger of, I think, stereotyping African Americans as a voting bloc. You're seeing this right now in the media, where the African Americans are being framed monolithically as delivering all the southern states for Biden. That's part true, but also that's a media construction and a scene that was just as prevalent yesterday, but didn't have the cachet as all the African Americans in Texas who had to stand for 3, 4, 5 hours before they had their votes taken. So let's be mindful about how the media does stereotype African Americans in the context of the political horse race.
Our next segment we call The Pick, and here we're interested in what makes a photo a good editorial choice among lots of options.
So this is a photograph that probably deserves a little bit more explanation, both about the photographer and also the participants. The photo was taken by Mary Altaffer of the AP. She's been a freelancer for that organization since 2004. She's worked for or contributed to the major news organizations in New York, and her photos of 9/11 are in the permanent collection of the Library of Congress. Now, the caption to this very important photograph reads as follows. New York Post reporter Rebecca Rosenberg left, New York Times reporter Jan Ransom, second from left, Fox News field producer Marta Donis, third from left, and freelance reporter working for Vulture magazine Victoria Bekimpis go over their notes at the end of the day in Harvey Weinstein's rape trial, Thursday, February 13, 2020 in New York. Courtroom artist Jane Rosenberg is seen in the background. The importance of the women in this photograph and the importance of women and the number of women covering this trial is certainly not just notable, but quite significant.
I really encourage folks to go look at the rest of the images in this series, because they give you insight not only into the work these particular women are doing, but the kind of work that journalists are doing covering these big events like the Weinstein trial. These are women covering the Weinstein trial, and Weinstein is somebody who did terrible things to women and, among other things, very drastically impeded the careers of women. The second thing is that this is a really empowering image of women journalists, but I think it also needs to be read in the context of an industry that is still overwhelmingly male. In 2019, the Women's Media Center reported results of a study showing that women across the media industry are barely at 40% employment across the industry. The ratio of women to men working for wire services was actually shown to have gone down. So this idea that we have progress in media industries in terms of gender equity and gender parity, that idea really needs to be dismissed. This image is both encouraging and empowering, and also should invite us to think about, what does it mean to have women covering the news, and how should we understand that? To me, ultimately, I'm really engaged by this photograph because of the way that it depicts women collaborating. These are women who are working for competing news organizations, and a journalist covering this high-profile event is going to want to get the scoop. That is still the nature of this job. And here they are essentially talking through, going over things, potentially sharing ideas. You see literal interaction. But I do find it really significant that in this context, these women are working together to try to get the story right.
Those two hands going back and forth really look like a dialogue. It's almost like the embodiment of fact-checking. I love the back wall. These press rooms are usually not that interesting, or they're just very cluttered. And here you see this whole history of yellowed crime articles and then photographs to the right of journalists over the years. I think that you can see those photos in the back wall even better in one of the other pictures that Mary took. All of that material shows how important this picture is of women journalists in the context of news history.
The other thing I wanted to point out was you mentioned that some of the photos in the series feature women shooting photographs out of a bathroom window in order to get better shots. And that image brought to mind a famous image made in 1997 by then White House photographer Barbara Kinney of Secretary of State Madeleine Albright and First Lady Hillary Clinton in a restroom, two very powerful women ostensibly discussing policy and meaningful topics in a women's restroom. That kind of image of the halls of power can be anywhere that women are really is echoed to me. Thanks for joining us, everyone.
See everyone again in 2 weeks.